Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Hey there, Jim.
Hey, John, I'm so excited for this episode. I can really stand it.
I know. We're both like giddy, I guess, as we were when we recorded this interview. Anyway, this is season 4, episode 23. The end is nigh. But before we get to the end, we have just an enormous treat today talking to the one and only Nick Mohammed.
Or as you may know him, Nate the Great from Ted Lasso.
You got some, Nate?
No. No. God, no. Never mind. I'm sorry.
Come on now. You're one of us. Let's go. Fire away. What do you got?
Okay. Right. It's just oh no, in the pocket. It's just something that I thought of. It's, you know what? It's not even very good. It's probably really bad. You know what? It's embarrassing even.
All right, come on now. Walk us through it.
Okay, so I thought if we started the attack on the wing, Jamie could run through near side. Then when the defence follows, Sam could fill his spot.
So use Jamie as a decoy?
No. No. Well, in this case, yes.
It's so cool when a guy is as red hot in a series that is as wonderful and absolutely, I'm not even sure what the word I'm looking for is, absolutely as in the sort of zeitgeist of all of our right now, to get a chance to talk to a guy that not only shares our interest in magic, but also is willing to chat with us about a series that we love. What a coup for my friend, John Gaspard, to get Nick Mohammed on our little podcast.
Well, thank you for, I don't know if it's actually a coup. He has PR people who know what he likes, and he wanted to talk about magic. And I'll just take us back to one of our first interviews with Dick Cavett, where people said, wow, you got Dick Cavett. And I said, people don't understand. If you love magic and you want to talk about it and you're not really known for it, you don't get that many opportunities.
Right.
Dick Cavett wanted to talk about magic, and as did Nick Mohammed. And he was very proactive in, I can't do it now. Let's try it later. Can't do it now. Can't do it now. Because he was just really, really, really busy. He was everywhere for a while. He was like Roy Kent. He's everywhere. He's everywhere.
That's right. It's so much fun to chat with them. And both in this interview and pre and post interview, when we weren't recording, he could not have been a nicer human being. Yeah. He just was so down to earth and so, he was a delight from start to finish.
He was. Instead of talking about how great it was, let's
get in
and do it. He started out in magic when he was younger. He went into comedy, then to acting. But like many of our guests, the first thing that grabbed his attention when he was a kid was magic.
We'd love talking to people who start in magic and then kind of use it on and off for the rest of their career. So that's who we are. And we're delighted to have you here.
I couldn't be more excited. I really could not be more excited.
So kind, both of you. Oh, well, look, absolute pleasure. Magic is my first love and will always be my love. I absolutely adore it, even though I'm like kind of, I guess, not known really for doing magic as much as I'm known for doing other things. Maybe I love it. I read a magic book. I always have like a magic book on my bedside that I'm sort of pouring into. I obviously don't get to perform as much as I used to, but very much work professionally as a magician through kind of college and everything, and to sort of pay my way a bit, and at weddings and hotels and stuff. So it's been with me for so long. So I love talking about it.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. How did it start?
So it started with my sister being given a Paul Daniels magic set for her birthday. And so I would have been, I was like 4 years old. I was like really, really young, but I loved it. Like just loved it. Obviously couldn't really do any of it, but was fascinated by it. At the time, it was sort of going into sort of like the late 80s, the Paul Daniels Magic Show was a huge show on the BBC over here, like proper Saturday night telly, and it would I mean, I don't know. I think probably at one time it was probably drawing in like 10, 11 million viewers, a night. Obviously, there was a lot less choice back then, but it was proper primetime television, and it was excellent. And, it was my first introduction to sort of seeing, even international like magicians from overseas who would kind of get on like guest acts and so on. But just I loved it, and just kept sort of learning it and getting books. And every birthday or every Christmas, I'd get given you know a book, and I'd go to the library, the local library in Headingley, and take books out. And I remember specifically, having exhausted all of the kind of the books on magic for children, I remember the librarian saying, "Oh, there is this section over here," and it was for more kind of grown up or more I guess involved kind of magic with sleight of hand and so on. And I remember getting like Pat Page's Big Book of Magic, and just sort of, I remember just thinking, oh my goodness, there is stuff in here. I had no idea how this stuff works, and just being like, this is incredible. So I was really bitten by the bug so early on. And then it wasn't until, so and I would do like, not so much kids' parties, but I do stuff at like the church hall where my mum went to church, and I do old people's homes, and, the occasional friends and family event. I'd always have like deck of cards, and always been trying, sort of irritating probably people with it. And then I was really lucky. I got to meet Paul Daniels at a show, and I remember him saying, just to me, I'd seen a show, and then we got to sort of meet him to sort of say hello afterwards. And he was like, "Oh, where do you live?" And I was like, "Oh, I live in Leeds." And he's like, "Oh, there's some good magicians in Leeds, and have you contacted this person? Because he's a great magician." And that guy was a guy called Harry Nichols. And then he sort of then taught me for a little bit. I'd go every fortnight to his place, and he would teach me some kind of more involved kind of close-up stuff, to be fair, of which I still can do now, like chop cut routine and 4 ace routine and coins through table. And a lot of his stuff was probably like Ken Brooks stuff, or quite or Fred Capps routines, really, that hadn't really changed much when he was doing them, and I probably learned them verbatim, but which you end up, it becomes a muscle memory thing almost. And he put me in contact with two people, Alan Driffield and Cynthia Neptune, who happened to run the junior section of the Northern Magic Circle. And it so happened that Alan, he lived like a few streets down from my family home. So then every once a month, I'd go to these junior sort of Northern Magic Circle meetings, and I suddenly realized that there's actually more than just me who are into magic, who are kids, and that there are magic conventions, and that there are competitions and lectures and magic dealers and things like that. And it just expanded that whole world, and I just devoured it, like absolutely devoured it. And then, to be honest, just kept going. Then, I guess started to take on more professional, once I turned 16, would, work in bars and restaurants and stuff, and went to university, and there were lots of events that I could, do magic at that, through, being a student and at the various social events. And I only really stopped doing it professionally. I mean, like, the last kind of close-up gig I did, I was probably like late 20s, like maybe. So I sort of, and only because telework had sort of started to take off, and I guess I was approaching tables in a kind of close-up environment, and people would be like, "Oh, what are you doing here? Are you that guy who does?" And it had become a bit of a weird thing, because they're like, "Oh no, I'm actually here to do magic, and we shouldn't really talk about that, but we can," So, but then increasingly, I'm trying to sort of put more magic back into my work, particularly in terms of stuff that I write. Obviously, there was the book, but even stuff that I'm sort of developing for telly. And then the weirdest kind of full circle, I will stop talking in a second. The weirdest full circle was when I sat down to do the first table read for Ted Lasso, and Jason had a deck of bicycle playing cards and was fiddling with them, and I was like, oh my god! And he was like, I know that you do magic, and then we just geeked out about magic forever. And in fact, I was in New York about 2-3 weeks ago doing press for a TV show for Disney, and I went to Tannen's magic shop in New York, which I had never been to before. And I just texted Jason, said, "Oh, I've just been to Tannen's for the first time," and he was like, "Hey, I'm in New York, we should hang out." So we kind of got together, and we just geeked out more about magic. And then just yesterday, I rewatched Derek Del Gaudio's show In and of Itself, and just I'd seen it before when it first kind of came on to Hulu, and I watched it again. I was like, God, that's an incredible show. But yeah, so that's my potted history of how I got into magic.
Well, you've covered a couple of our questions here
Yeah,
already.
exactly. I'm skipping down. We're against the wall already. It's just, can you just talk a little bit about what that act was and what you were performing, maybe what the highlight of that act was?
Yeah, so I was doing, I mean, I guess as I was sort of growing, as I was growing up, I did do a few of the kind of sort of stage competitions and so on, like, regional ones. I did do Young Magician of the Year in London in 1997 and did a couple of those competitions at Blackpool as well. But I was never that good at sleight of hand, not good enough to kind of go, to be considered for FISM or anything like that. I just didn't really have that. I'm quite short. I've got quite sort of small, sort of stocky hands. I can't even still to this day palm a playing card without it really sort of showing. So I used to do a patter stage act to kind of get away from the fact manipulation was very in fashion at the time. But I found myself really enjoying close up, and so then really sort of stuck at that. But I would do, and again, it was a lot of the stuff that I'd been taught, but it was like, so I do a 4 race routine. I do chop cup, and still to this day do chop cup with the satsuma appearing at the end and stuff. And I think it's either Fred Kapp's sort of coins through table. But I do other like little bits and pieces. I had like a ring on rope routine that I could sort of, I guess, slightly more kind of parlor magic. And then I guess particularly off the back of the success of likes of Darren Brown and even like seeing those David Blaine shows, realizing that actually, and as I got older, it was quite nice to sort of pare back on the kind of the performance, the more kind of performative sort of style of magic that I was doing, and it just become a little bit quieter, a little bit more nuanced, a bit more kind of long form in the routining. And I guess the card magic I do now is a lot more kind of, it's not so much mentalism with cards, but it's quite hands off. I became a huge fan of Simon Aronson and Juan Tamariz and all of the memorized deck sort of magic and all the stuff that was stack dependent, which could be really miraculous and quite hands off, and you could really focus on kind of quieter presentations and it happening in their hands and things like that. And so I really loved that. I loved Bill Malone as well when I sort of was getting on, and loved how seamless his personality fitted with the style of performance, whereas I felt like I had who I was, and then there were tricks that I'd learned and that actually they didn't always kind of, marry together well. And so, but I think it takes a bit of time to kind of work out kind of who you are as a performer. Often, there's so much to learn in magic. There's obviously the trick side to it and the sleights and whatever, but there's the finding who you are as a magic persona. And I think I increasingly felt that I wasn't really doing anything different or anything. I felt like there were a lot of magicians who were like me doing close up at weddings and hotels. I felt like it was a bit of a factor in. So I took a little bit of a back step towards performing, maybe a little bit, whilst I was sort of trying to sort of recalibrate a little bit. But now, certainly the sort of stuff that I now enjoy is a lot more kind of laid back and long for. It's less performative. It's less in your face. It's less kind of. It can still be spectacular and miraculous, but it's certainly a quieter form, I guess, of magic than I was sort of brought up watching.
Okay, this has led to at least 3 different questions for me, so I'll try to backtrack and make sense of it.
Yeah.
Did you buy anything at Tannen's?
Yes.
What did you get?
Well, I wanted to buy, because I'd seen it on their website, I wanted to buy Para Miracles by, I want to say, Ted Leslie, I think. And I wanted to buy Worlds Beyond, which is the Paul Curry book, which are old books, but that I borrowed from the Magic Circle library, loved them, but didn't own them. And I saw and I thought, oh, it'd be quite fun to get these from Tannen's. And then I went there and they're like, we don't have those in stock. I was like, I'm only here a day. They were like, we can order them for you, but it'll take, and I was like, no, that's all right. So then I just browsed, and it was great because, I've got kids, and so you don't always get time to just go into a magic shop and just stand there for an hour looking at all this stuff and just properly browsing. And to be fair, it's a long time since I've been into a magic store. Just do so much kind of online, magic purchases. And I'm a real sucker for a magic purchase. If I get sent an email from Vanishing Ink, I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, get that. But I bought 2 books by Patrick Redford. one, I can't remember the titles and I haven't read them yet. I think they're called like Out of Order or Slightly Out of Order. It's stack stuff. It's memorized deck stuff. But I don't own them, and I thought I owned a lot of the stack stuff. So I'm kind of, I'm excited to dive in. I'm currently reading Tricks of the Mind. It's on my I'm in a hotel, but I brought the book with me. Tricks of the Mind by Joel Dickinson, which is a kind of mentalism thing. But yeah. So that's what I bought.
So you talked about finding a character, and I want to jump ahead to Mr. Swallow, because I'll have links in the show notes of a couple of appearances you did on BBC as Mr. Swallow where you did magic. And there was one where you did a 3-card trick, and it seemed so perfect for his character. Everything that's interesting about that character comes through in that routine because he's right and he's wrong and he's excited and he's upset and all that.
So basically it is the 3-card trick. So it just uses 1, 2, 3 cards, as you might imagine. We're going to use jokers, basically. We're going to use the 2 jokers, and we're going to use an ace. Now, you might have seen this game before, like Chase the Ace, or sort of 3 shells and like a P underneath, and you have to move them around and try and find where it is. So the ace, we're going to pop it on top, and then immediately pop it on the bottom. So, jokers on the bottom. No. So, what the magician would say is, okay, joker's on the bottom, where is the ace? Now, it's logical to think, okay, joker on the bottom, either the top or the middle is going to be the ace. So you have a look on top, top's a joker, so fine, you know that it's in, that's a joker. Hang on a sec. Ace is on the bottom. Ace is on the bottom, Christ. The magician... then says, instead of finding the ace, find the jokers because you got more chance, right? You got twice as many odds. So now, again, logical, really easy to think, well, ace is on the bottom, so both the top and the middle are going to be the joker. Now, the top one, you can see, is also an ace, and the middle one's, hang on a sec. 1, 2, 3, sorry. Okay, so, right, there it is. There's a joker, and there's an ace. That's a 10. It hasn't worked, sorry. It hasn't worked.
Tell us who Mr. Swallow is, because we don't really see him here in the US.
Yeah, no, sure. So this is a character that I mean, it's based, going way back, it's based on an impression of a school teacher I had. And so I've sort of been doing that voice for a long time. That is an impression of the teacher. And she is a she, and so the performance is quite camp. There's no innuendo in it, but it's just partly because in my head I'm sort of playing her. But I never really worried about that. And so the character, I mean, was always this sort of bumbling fool who sort of had found himself, often when I started doing it on the comedy circuit, I would sort of format it as if he was doing like a presentation about something, whether it's about anger management or how to improve your memory or kind of the highway code, just he'd pick a topic and he'd do a lecture on it, but it would quickly turn out he was sort of the worst person. His slides were all out of order, or he couldn't get his clicker to work, or he'd very quickly and easily become distracted about the thing that he was sort of supposedly meant to be talking about. And I always found doing that very fun and very silly. And it was actually, it was actually a good while before I realized that actually, because I'd obviously grown up doing magic and worked as a magician, and then had got into comedy sort of through university. And I used to use magic as a way into doing comedy a little bit, because it was less scary if I knew I had the tricks to hide behind than if I was just going out in character or doing sketch comedy or whatever, which is always, quite galling when jokes don't work or you're just first starting out. So I used to hide behind the magic a little bit. And then I eventually dropped the magic faded further and further into the background. And then I just became very comfortable going on stage as Mr. Swallow, talking about absolutely anything, but it was all comedy. And then eventually, and it was for when I was doing the Houdini show, where it was him putting on a biopic of Houdini. He just challenged himself to try and do a musical retelling of Houdini's life. And but he's not prepared. He doesn't think he's meant to be doing the water tank, but it turns out he is meant to be doing it. So it's building up to him doing this thing and he's not prepared. And anyway, and in that show, I thought, oh, it'd be fun to just tell that bit of Houdini's life when Houdini was doing a lot of magic before kind of turning mostly to escapology. And because I could do the chop cup routine, I was like, why don't I just do that top cup routine as I knew it, with probably all of the kind of original Ken Brook lines, like all the Paul Daniels lines of the top of the bottom of the cup and all that kind of all that business and the loads appearing. But if I just do it in character, let's just see what it does to that trick. And actually, I guess you know, like what you were saying, John, it's that thing of like, suddenly there's a lot more fun to be had because he doesn't then know how he's then surprised by the ball appearing. But it was never like by design that I will choose to be that. It was just like, well, if I just perform this same piece but in character, this is sort of the natural progression of how the kind of character reacts, and but it actually elevates the whole thing and it makes it more surprising. And then when the final loads appear and then the other one appears, it's like, you know, he just walks away and it's like, oh no, I don't, you know, he doesn't know how to even react to it, because it's sort of, it's almost like the magic is out of control and there's some kind of other machine sort of whirring in the background that he's suddenly not in control. He set something in motion that he's suddenly kind of fearful of, and that felt for me inherently funny. And you know, the natural extension of that, when I was doing the Houdini show, I remember coming up with the idea for that show of more being like, well, what's the funniest thing for Mr. Swallow to do next? I'd done the lecture on how to improve your memory. I'd done a lecture on whatever, all these kind of, you know, things which were, you know, which he could sort of talk about. And then I thought, oh, it'd be funny to put him in a genuinely life-threatening situation every night, because that character is not designed to kind of deal with that well. Therefore, that is funny. And so, yeah.
So did you do the water tank every night as Swallow?
I did, yeah. So I did that at
Good
the
Lord.
Fringe, and then I did it at Soho Theatre for 6 weeks. So yeah, I did it probably about 100 times all in all. So yeah, I loved it. And you know, it's one of those effects where, even though, and you know, the style of Mrs. Swallow's comedy is often very silly and quite farcical and physical, but it's amazing the power of that water tank. You know, you can be silly, and you can build up to this idea that, oh, is he going to go through with it? Is he not? And really toy with the audience's expectation. But as soon as you get in that water, something shifts in the room, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and I say that as a punter, you know, when I've seen other people do it, however they present it or whatever has come before it, as soon as that lid gets shut, it's like, oh, crikey, okay. Because we all know it's like an instinct as a human. It's that instinct of, well, we all know what being underwater is like, and we know we can't breathe underwater. So there's something very instinctive and quite visceral about the reaction to that. And I loved that. I loved the kind of the shift in the room. And then it then becomes, you know, once he's out, it becomes silly again. But like, it's, you know, I loved that we could play with people like that.
It's a very scary trick.
Really
Jim and
is.
I saw David Blaine do it. Jim, I'm sure you've seen Penn and Teller's version where Teller dies because they don't get the answer in time. And the idea of doing that, well, Jim, you're an actor. Do you want to do that every night?
No, I don't. Because I don't have any concept of how you know, I assume from what I know about Houdini that it's probably very foolproof. But I would not in any way, shape, or form want to be upside down underwater on a nightly basis for anything in the world. I wouldn't do it. So I applaud you.
Yeah, well, bless you. Well, I think it was one, you know, and like you say, you just rehearse, and you know, it's also choreographed, all the struggles choreographed. There are two of the actors who are in the show at that point in the show, they are literally just there. They're just either just on the tank or they're right next to it for anything that they see that has happened that's not been rehearsed, so they know that something's wrong. But there was one night, one thing, and I remember the brilliant magician Danny Hunt, who was our escapologist and all around brilliant magic consultant. He had provided the tank and everything, and he said to us, he said, how many times are you doing it, how many performances? And I said, oh, all in all it'll be about 100. And he was like, oh well, if we're doing it that many times, it will go wrong at least once, because the law of averages, it just has to, and it'll be nothing that you can prepare for, but just so you know, at one point something will go wrong, and because it kind of has to. And we were like, oh, okay. And we didn't really believe him. And then I think 75, 80 performances in, something just jammed. The bit, you know, without going into method, but the bit that's meant to come off and slide in a particular way just didn't. And it was at a point when I needed to do my secret extra breath that the audience don't see. And so it was like, oh, we're going to need to, and I had to be got out like not the way that I was intended, and we had to make an announcement after the show because they ended up seeing something that they shouldn't, just to protect the secret, and just to say you saw something very unique tonight and we apologize and blah blah blah. But and it was just because it was to do, and it was circumstantial. It was the night before another show was coming into play on top of us that meant that we'd have to store the tank in a particular way, and something had warped and we'd not spotted it, and it just meant that something caught. And if we'd have done it another 100 times, something different probably would have gone wrong at another point. And it was having to accept the fact that, oh yeah, well, it is just what it is. You're getting into water and you're being locked in, and there are just things, it's mechanical, there are just, but you put in as many fail safes. But yeah, so it was getting in the next night that was the scariest thing, because then it's like, happen again.
I'm on edge right now, just even contemplating doing that. And if somebody, if I had said, this is what I'm going to do, and you're going to loan me your tank, and and the guy said to me, something's going to go wrong, I would have said, take the tank back. I'm going to do something with the chop cup. Because it just really, truthfully, I just could not have stomached it. It would have been too much for me as a human and a performer.
You say that, but I feel like it's one of those things. Don't get me wrong; it never got normal. There would always be an element of, okay, well, here you go, and I had to do a breath hold for like at least a minute and a half, and so it was it did have an element of like, well, it's always gonna feel a little bit odd, and as soon as you get underwater, your body instinctively says, yeah, but what if you do need to suddenly breathe now and you can't, like your body sort of tries to like fight the theater of it. That you've got to stay under there for at least a minute and a half or whatever to create that tension, but your body's like, oh, but what if today's the day when actually you can't or you don't or whatever. But it did get easier. I would say that just the because you can only go by everything you've done before, and then once you've done it once before, you're like, well, I did it yesterday, and then you've done it twice, like, well, I've done it 2 times, and so it was only when it did go wrong that once I was like, oh, now I feel like I'm starting afresh again. But your body builds up, there's a sense of as normal as it can be, some sense of normality to it.
I'm out of the contest.
You're out. You're doing chop cup.
I couldn't do it. It would not be for me.
I'm reminded of the moment in the movie The World According to Garp where they're looking at buying a house and a plane crashes into it. And Robin Williams turns to Mary Beth Hurt, his wife, and says,
"We'll take the house."
Garp.
Honey, the chances of another plane hitting this house are astronomical. See, it's been pre-disastered. We're going to be safe here.
I think going through a mechanical failure, you go, okay, I survived that. I can survive things again.
Yeah.
No.
Well, continuing just briefly on Mr. Swallow, I don't know how tired you get talking about him, but I find him fascinating. Jim has an expression that he taught me about a mutual friend who he said he is often wrong but never in doubt. And that's when I look at Mr. Swallow, I go, that's him. He's often wrong but never in doubt about it. And there's one link that I'll put in the show notes of you in characters, Mr. Swallow, doing an amazing card trick with your son, which is not only adorable, but really amazing. And does he have an interest in magic, or is he just sort of doing that as a favor for Dad?
No, he genuinely does. I mean, he kind of, whether it's a phase and whether he'll kind of, sort of take it on, but he, and he's got a properly really good memory as well. So he was, he had seen me do like, the memorized decks done on Catster's Countdown, that program that was first on, and I think he'd seen the clip, and he just sort of like said, sort of offhand, he's like, oh, can I go on and do something? And I was like, well, no, probably not. And then I sort of thought, I wonder if the producers would be open to this idea of him playing Master Swallow as my Mr. Swallow, and what we could do and how we could build that effect to make it feel real. And he performed that brilliantly, I think.
Now, in reverse order, Master Swallow, what was the last one I said?
Koala.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's the easiest one, so don't. And then what did I say before that?
Albatross.
Yeah, and then what?
Walrus.
Yeah, and then what?
Puffin.
Yes, and then
Dolphin.
what? Yes.
Orangutan.
Orangutan, yeah.
Jaguar.
Yes.
Sloth.
Yes.
Elephant.
Yes.
Howling monkey.
Yes.
Tree frog.
Yes.
Lion.
Yes.
Sea otters.
Correct.
Meerkats.
Yes.
Penguins.
Yes.
Chameleon.
Yes.
Flamingo.
Very good.
Mandrill.
Yes.
Hippo.
Yes.
And you know, the method is invisible. And you know, a lot of people think it's an earpiece, and it's I swear on his life it's not. And so it's just that, yeah, he's definitely got the performing bug. He loves watching performances, and you know, but you know, it's that kind of tricky thing of, you know, my wife is a teacher, she's not an actor or anything, and so it's that thing of like, how far do we encourage that side, or you know, do we you know, because knowing how difficult it is to be an actor and to exist, you know, to perform for a living, and you know, it can be a real roller coaster. So you know, we want him to certainly feel that he gets the honest sort of, you know, I guess we only kind of had, he's 8 years old now, so he's only ever sort of seen me, I guess, be a level as an actor that I guess I am at the moment in terms of the shows I'm doing and work I'm doing. Not to say that you know, it can always change and everything, but he's not necessarily experienced or seen all the sort of struggle and the up and down of it that kind of preceded that and preceded, you know, before we had kids and so on. So you know, he's maybe got a slightly rose-tinted view of it. Yeah. But you know, on saying that, of course, we want to encourage him, and if it's sort of the kind of thing that makes him happy and he wants to do. But he's really, you know, he's into lots of things, but he does love performing for sure.
Well, like I said, there'll be a clip in the show notes. It's standing ovation from the cast and the audience. It was a remarkable performance.
John, will you put the clip that I saw in the show notes of you doing what I assume is a memorized deck, but I have absolutely no idea how you did it, but it was stunning. And
thank
you were off the cuff with the panel in a way that, as a performer, as an improvisational performer, I was like, holy crap.
If I get it right, I obviously won't look. Move on to the next one. So King of Hearts. So then it's I think it's the Jack of Clubs. Is that right? Jack of Clubs?
Yes.
Then it's the Seven of Spades. Yes. Then the 10 of Hearts.
Yes.
Then the Ace of Diamonds, not the Ace of Diamonds.
Yeah.
Then the 4 of Spades, I think.
Yeah.
Is that right? Then the 7 of Hearts.
Yeah.
Then the 4 of Diamonds and the Ace of Clubs. Yeah. Not the funniest section, is it?
It's very impressive.
I'll tell you how I do it. So it's basically, it's the method of loci. Anyone can do this. You can look it up. So you have to peg so each card is like a person and a journey, and you alternate journey person, journey person. So Queen of Diamonds so that's Queen of England to me. I see her going clubbing in Seven Sisters to that 7 of Clubs. Is 7 of Clubs next? Is that next? 7 of Clubs?
Yes.
And on stage on the club is Alan Titchmarsh singing Bohemian Rhapsody. Queen of Spades? Queen of Spades? Is that right? Yeah. I won't be calling it. So then the 10 of Diamonds, yes?
Yes.
Then the 6 of Clubs.
Yes.
Ace of Hearts.
Yeah.
The 9 of Diamonds.
Yeah.
The 4 of Clubs and the 2 of Hearts.
Yeah.
Yes, the 7 of Diamonds.
Yeah.
The 3 of something. 3 of Clubs.
Yeah.
The 4 of Hearts and sometimes I have to look. 6 of Diamonds.
To be able to be that funny and that off the cuff while I'm doing something completely, what looks to me to be very difficult, I was like, wow, holy God, that's tremendous. So,
thank you. That's very kind. It was, you know, who know, you know, you build up to those televised performances, and you know, you rehearse, but you can only, you know, you never really know what the panel are going to throw at you. And a lot of those are brilliant stand-up / improv comics, you know, of which I wouldn't really count myself as one at all. You know, much prefer stuff to be written down and rehearsed and learnt, you know, as a lot of magicians are. You know, it's about practice and more practice. And so, yeah, but I'm glad that was your take from it. Thank you.
yeah, it was terrific. I just enjoyed the hell out of it. I watched it about 3 times and showed it to my wife. And she said, how is he doing it? I said, I really don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I can take some guesstimates as to what's going on, but I have no idea how this is happening. So it just was terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to talk about one of the major reasons I wanted to have you on the show was this book series. It's a 2-book series at this point, of the Young Magician series, which is terrific. And as I said, had I read it before I wrote the Young Eli Marks, I might have just said, all right, that's been covered. I don't need to go there. Although they are quite different.
Yeah.
Where did the idea come from?
Well, it was quite an organic thing, really. You know, I'd never set out to write prose, even, you know, not children's fiction or anything. I was doing a Mr. Swallow show, like him doing like a retelling of Dracula, actually. And the one of the editors or publishers at Penguin Random House happened to be in the audience, not because like my agent had sent them or anything like that. And they like left their card afterwards and said, "Oh, it'd be great to, you know, just, you know, I feel like you've got quite a silly sense of humor off the back of that show. Have you ever considered writing for children?" And I said, "No, but, you know, I'm up for chatting about it." And so we then just sort of subsequently met after the Fringe. And I think there was a few, I sort of just sort of, you know, did like a page outline on a few ideas. I thought, oh, that might be a fun thing, you know, for children's fiction. But the one that really kind of, you know, sort of sparked their interest, and I guess that I had the most sort of connection to and authenticity to, was because, you know, of my upbringing within magic and loving magic as a kid. They were like, "Oh, that's the idea." And, you know, I was a huge fan of all those shows like, you know, The Goonies and things like that. You know, the idea of like a sort of these sort of slightly sort of geeky, gawky characters, sort of outsidey characters, sort of who kind of come together and, you know, solve these kind of crimes or uncover these plots or something, but use their magic sort of sleight of hand and abilities to help. I felt like that felt like a really fun area. And so yeah, I mean, and look, it took me ages to write. You know, I was acting at the time. We had, I think Finn was born, and maybe even after as well, during the lifetime of that of me writing that. It took a good couple of years. But I'm so proud, as in it's the thing that, you know, because everything else I've done, you know, whether it be telly or film or something, or even script writing, it's so rare to like write a thing that you can hold. It's something that you can hold, like the idea that it's this sort of tangible thing, and I feel like, and it'll never change. You know, I can't change it. It's there. It exists on a bookshelf and in libraries and stuff. And so, and I can see it, and I love it. Like I love that. It was a, don't get me wrong, it was a real challenge, and it took a while. And but I loved it. And you know, who knows when I'll have time to write some more, but I'd love to at some point. But I really enjoyed, particularly that first one. I really was like, oh, it's so cathartic just getting to write about, you know, and, you know, even the way the Magic Circle's presented, obviously so much of it is tongue in cheek, but, you know, I was able to pour so much of my childhood into it, really, you know, so much of like what I found funny growing up and, you know, going to conventions and my experience of magic and so on. So yeah, it's sort of, you know, it does poke fun at magic here and there, but you know, it was, I really enjoyed doing it.
I've talked to a lot of TV writers and screenwriters who've gone on to write novels, and I'm always curious, how did your work as a screenwriter and a sketch writer and writing episodic television, how did that inform your writing of the novel, and how did it help? What leg up did it give you that a normal novelist might not have?
Well, I don't know if it did help. It's so difficult to know the answer to that, because you know, I guess I was, you know, I knew I could write funny stuff. Like I knew I could write funny dialogue, I guess, because I'd done that before. But I didn't know if I could sort of world build, you know, in the way that you kind of need to in a work of sort of prose, and, you know, and I didn't necessarily know how to tell like a really good story that kind of felt like I want the reader to, you know, feel excited at the end of a chapter and want to know what's happening. You know, I didn't know necessarily how to do that. I mean, I guess I knew what books I liked as a child, and you know, I reread a lot of sort of stuff and tried to sort of get my head around it. But I remember even Penguin just saying, just have a go at it, and then we'll just, you know, once there's something there, we then know whether it's in the right direction. And, you know, the support here, you can have a story editor, copy editor, or whatever, you know, we can work on stuff together. So I kind of wrote quite blindly in a way. I just sort of, you know, I obviously, you know, I worked on the story first and kind of got that signed off in the first instance, and, you know, worked out what each chapter was going to be, and, you know, and also crucially how the magic tricks were going to be done, so that I kind of knew what you could hint at and sort of seed along the way before revealing it at the end. But other than that, I was just like, well, here we go, start writing. And, you know, some days it was like, great, you know, it's flowing and I feel good, and other days it's like, I feel like I'm writing and I'm just going to delete all this because I just don't know what it is, and it's just probably filler and it's not advancing the story. And so yeah, I don't know. But overwhelmingly for the most part, a really fun and fulfilling process, albeit it took a while.
It sounds like, even though you don't think so, that your TV writing experience, I'm thinking in particular, although maybe did Intelligence come later?
Intelligence, it did come after. Yes, it did come late. I will have been working on the pilot though. I probably would have been like sort of pitching sort of stuff in that world. I think.
And in that instance, you had to, I'm sure, outline where the series was going to go, and you had to work out all the beats, and so you had a very solid outline to write that series. And you sat down to do the same thing with the book. You weren't a discovery writer. You were a writer who went, oh, I know that I need to have the beats figured out, and you'd learn that from TV writing.
Yes, it was definitely, yes, I guess you're right. I think that there's a discipline in sort of breaking it down into sort of smaller achievable chunks, but which is useful to sort of do, in both sort of film writing and, crossing over into book writing, that outline stages, treatments, character development, series arcs or narrative arc, whatever. Yeah, I guess knowing my way a little bit around that definitely will have helped. I think I still found it daunting, the idea of like a book, because in a book it's like a book feels like proper, I guess. It feels like it's a book, it's got a beginning and a middle and an end, and once it's there, there's no way out. You can't, it just felt, it felt quite proper.
What's the reaction been to it? Maybe in the magic world in general? Did the Magic Circle? What was their reaction?
They did the typical Magic Circle thing of not really saying anything about it. Slightly ignore it. Because there were some points I was making about the Magic Circle which I think were genuine and legitimate about the changes that possibly need to be made, and but clearly it's a work of children's fiction, and so much of it is quite silly and tongue-in-cheek. So there was a balance there. There's definitely been magicians and in fact magicians who were who are much older than me and who knew me when I was a kid starting out in magic as well, who've been like, oh, I read your book, and they clearly recognize some of the characters in there as maybe inspired by some of the characters that would have been floating around that time. But yeah, no, they've always enjoyed it. And yeah, I mean, it was that thing of, I think I thought at the time, I was like, oh, I wonder if like, this will be like the start of something, quite big for me. Will I suddenly find myself being like a children's author? And actually, I didn't. There was, a bit of a splash at the start, but, it then just became, okay, well, when's the next book kind of thing? It's like, oh, okay, right now. And, it is, I mean, obviously, how it is as well, John, it's sort of, you're on to the next one and you're on to the next one. And it was happening at a time when I was then getting very busy as a TV writer and as an actor as well. So it naturally, it sort of started to take the back foot a little bit. But then interestingly, and now, I guess, slightly off the back of Ted Lasso and people, I guess, becoming a bit more familiar with me and my work and stuff, there is actual interest in developing it for telly. And it's sort of quite nice to sort of go back into the book and be like, now I can look at this as like, well, now how will I adapt this for telly, rather than my experience as a TV writer going into prose. And now I can be like, oh, and now I can take something and start thinking about it for telly. So, that's quite fun.
So before we leave the Young Magician series, do you have any advice for someone who's starting a novel, that something you learned that maybe you got from screenwriting and TV writing that helped you on that process?
I think that I did. I think, writing about something that you love or something that you care about or a story that you really want to, I think you have to want to, because it's quite a thankless task, especially in the first stages of writing something, because you don't have much to show for it, and it obviously naturally grows, but it takes time. And it certainly takes time from an idea into a book that you can hold, right? So I feel like it being something that you care about really helps with the day-to-day of, hey, I'm going to write about this thing, and it's actually something that really excites me, or it's something that's important or that needs saying. That helps with the drive of it. But I guess, like what we were saying before, being able to sort of split it up into something that just feels a bit more manageable and doesn't feel as daunting is always really useful. So that's whether giving yourself, the time to kind of properly work up an outline so that you feel like you've got almost like a blueprint to sort of navigate your way through the writing process. And I guess setting deadlines, whether they're realistic or otherwise, I definitely missed tons of deadlines in writing it. And, and there were more, for my benefit to try and sort of just get something sort of done. But, giving yourself a deadline is always a surefire way of at least sort of trying to sort of achieve sort of something within a time frame. And then if you need to extend it or something, well, then that's fine. That's on you. But so I think just sort of making it manageable, but knowing that, there are lots of books in the world, there are, as much as it can feel like a bit of a hurdle or lots of hurdles, and there are lots of sort of psychological barriers to calling yourself a writer and sitting down and writing and saying, no, that's what I am doing. I'm a writer and I'm writing something and I'm an author, that, a lot of people do manage it and do it. So, knowing that it is within your grasp, and a lot of those people will have gone through exactly the same thing that you're feeling right now. So you kind of grasp onto that a little bit.
That's excellent advice. I want to jump back to you mentioning creating an outline for whether it's a series or for the book, I don't know if this is apocryphal, I don't know where I heard it, that Jason came up to you while shooting episode 2 or 3 of season 1 and said, by the way, Nick, this is where Nate's going over the 3 seasons. Is that true?
It's
that's phenomenal. When you look at like the TV show Lost, where it comes out that they're actually making it up as they went along. To have that foresight for that character, how did that help you?
But not just me, I think a few characters, they knew, where there were certain turning points in their story. It was I felt so lucky, and I distinctly remember it. It's the gala episode in season 1, which is I think episode 3 or 4. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And I remember, because obviously Ted takes Nate as his date, so Jason and I just had a lot of time just being next to each other during shooting, during setup, sat next to each other in the, at the table and stuff. And I remember specifically him saying, just so you know, this is where, and I didn't know the level of detail and exactly at what point everything, but he says, you're going to get promoted by the end of season 1. It's going to go to your head in season 2, and it's Empire Strikes Back. Basically, you're going to turn on your master, and you're going to then go to the dark side by the end of season 2, and you're going to join West Ham, the rival club where Rupert is going to be at. And then season 3 is not so much a redemption story, but it's about forgiveness and acceptance. So I guess it slightly follows a redemptive arc, but it's more about forgiveness than redemption, I guess. But and he outlined that as broadly as I have outlined that to you now, to me then. And because there's a very key point in that episode, because Rupert has shown up, and I think he takes the mic and at the end of that, everyone kind of gets up and sort of starts dancing, and Nate is sat back watching, and we made a very, very deliberate decision as to the reason. The viewer is meant to think, oh, Nate sat back not joining in with this dancing because he's introverted and he wouldn't be able to. And that is true. That is not, there's an element of the truth that is true to character at that point in his journey. But it's also true, and the way that I played it, even though it's in the wide, and what Jason was very keen to get was the idea of him sitting back and seeing that someone like Rupert has come in with all this power and has just changed the room, and look at what he's managed to achieve. And that just kind of going into the back of Nate's head, being like, that kind of oh, okay. So yeah, there's something to aspire to here. And him just taking, and he doesn't have in the end, it turns out obviously that he doesn't handle this new responsibility or this new little bit of power he gets by being promoted very well at all, and it quickly spirals. But they wanted to as writers to plant those seeds along the way, and they absolutely did, and they really paid dividends.
Even to not long after that, just a throwaway shot, even there's no focus on it at all, that the picture you've given him is in a place of prominence in his apartment.
That's heartbreaking. Just when he has the panic attack before in the funeral episode. Yeah. There's so much. I mean, they are so good at that storytelling. So much pathos, and I love all that.
My wife was so excited that I was going to get to talk to you today. We are enormous fans of the series.
Oh.
and of you. And she said, if there's an opportunity, please say hi to Nate the Great for me. So from my wife to you, we love the series. We loved you in the series. It's tremendous. Is there, do you hear anything about if you're hanging out with Jason in New York, is there any possibility that there's going to be some more from that world at all?
It's the $1 million. First of all, please say thank you to your wife, and genuinely, it means a lot. And I can't say enough. It was a casting that I went to, that I happened to get. It could have gone anyway. I'm so indebted and grateful for that show, because it has been life changing, and not just for me. People come up to me, quite frankly, every day at the moment, and it'll tail off at some point. But like, to say, like, I guess what you said, Jim, my wife said, is that it really resonated with people, that show. And those shows don't come around all the time. None of us were prepared for how I guess the reach of that show. We knew that we wanted to do our best. We knew that it had a very positive message behind it, and that it wasn't cynical, and it was slightly bucking the trend by not being so, and being hopeful and optimistic in a kind of a comedy space, which is quite saturated by more sort of cynical and snarky comedies, as brilliant as a lot of those comedies are, of course. But no one anticipated a global pandemic either. And I know season 1 came out during lockdown, so there's an element of that kind of people needing to hear just some joyful, optimistic stuff. But the amount of people who come up and say it got them through a difficult time, or it really changed their outlook on stuff, and or it's their kind of happy place. It's the happy place that they go to if they just need cheering up. They'll just rewatch episodes again. And I've never experienced anything like it as an actor or as a writer or anything. So to have been a part of that show has been so special. And we genuinely are a family. We get on so well. We have a very active WhatsApp group. And I think some of that you can just see on camera. It's sometimes difficult to fake some of that chemistry and camaraderie. And we're a unit, and we've gone through this journey together, and we're all of us so grateful. And you talk about having done work prior to that, and it's true. And Brett had, and Hannah had, and everything. And we joke, particularly with Hannah, who is like through the roof success, and we're all such fans of each other. Hannah has this funny thing where she says, yeah, it's only taken me 30 odd years to become an overnight success, or whatever, of hard graft in musical theatre and so on. But look, in terms of will there be more, it's the $1 million question. I think everyone would love for there to be more, but equally, it felt like the story, or particularly that story, came to an end. And like I said, they had mapped out Nate's arc for 3 seasons. They had envisaged it at 3 seasons. They know what Ted's story was going to be for 3 seasons, and Hannah's, and Roy Kent's, and so it's just like the last thing I think everyone would want is to sort of keep going, and for it to fizzle out, and to get sort of steadily worse or something like that. And this isn't off the back of anything Jason's told me. He would love to do. I'm sure he would love to do more. It's just it has to be the right story. There are obviously things that were set up in that final season, the women's football team and so on, that you could see being, maybe that's a new incarnation of it. But I don't think anyone's in a rush to do it. And I personally think it'd just be good to wait a little bit, and then come back with something, maybe a film or a one-off, or who knows what, just to kind of regroup everyone. But who knows? It's up to them. And there is still something in me that thinks, what, it was perfect as 3. Just leave it, and it'll just be its own thing, and it'll just exist.
I just had a very small part in a film here in the States, and worked with Mike O'Gorman, who and I just geeked out and said, we were sitting together, and I said, can I just for a minute be a fan and ask you some questions? And so I asked him, what was, and he said it was, in his experience, one of the most welcoming, kindest sets he's ever been on. And so I just tossed that out, because you had to be part of that welcoming atmosphere, and he said it was incredible. So
Well, that all comes from the top. It really did. Jason, Brendan, Joe, Bill. Bill was less around in the later series, once he got, but from season 1, it all came from the top and creating this. We knew the kind of show that we were creating, but the fact that we had the same crew for all 3 seasons, and season 3 dragged on and on and on and on. It took a while to film. The episodes were longer. But everyone loved being a part of that show. And I remember my wife saying, actually, I can't remember which season, it was maybe season 2, when we just finished that, we had a wrap party, but it wasn't really a wrap party because we couldn't really properly socialize because of COVID, but we were allowed to be outside. So we just all had some drinks on Richmond Green. And we were actually living in Richmond at the time. So it was great. So my wife just wandered down and she kind of commented that what's so great about the Ted Lasso cast crew is that you don't, because she didn't, she knew some of the cast from having watched the show, but she didn't know who everyone was or whether they were crew or catering or makeup or supporting artists or key actors or writers, but everyone just gets on. There's no sense of hierarchy. There's no sort of turkeys. Everyone just sort of is proud of what they're doing and wants to be a part of, a small cog in a big machine. And it was like that, and she really noticed it, and she said that it feels quite rare. And I think it probably is, actually. I think it is. It's a very special project for that.
Well, we love it.
Yeah, it's a delight.
Anyway, we're here to talk about magic.
Sorry, I got off on a thing.
That's okay. That's okay. We've kept you for almost an hour. Let's do one final question about magic. So what is it that excites you about the magic world today?
I think there's some just brilliant magic out there today. I feel, having grown up with it, and I'm 40 odd now, 43, so I feel like I'm quite well read within magic. I've read a lot, and I've read a lot of the classics, and I've read a lot of old stuff, and whether I got it from the Magic Circle Library or I own it, and I've got quite a lot of magic books myself now, but yet I am constantly surprised by the new originality of thought, the new approaches to kind of classic effects with new methods, new methodology, new presentation, just being constantly surprised. And to be frank, constantly baffled by how some stuff is done. I'll sit and watch stuff and be like, I have no idea. I thought I knew quite a lot about how things might be done. And I can think of ways that I might do it, but then they're keep being shut down by the way I'm seeing them present it, or them being able to show both sides of it, or you see that side of it and I'm like, I have no idea. And I love being fooled, and I'm constantly fooled by so much great stuff. And there's like a newish wave, I guess. I mean, they're not new, but they're in their 30s really, but they're kind of, the likes of people like Christian Grace and Andrew Frost and Mark Kirsty, who are doing some really interesting, exciting stuff. I mean, Andrew Frost is the most phenomenal card worker I think I have ever seen, and has his own sort of naturalistic style with kind of cards, such that the magic is just happening. And you're like, I mean, it's looking like you're doing nothing, but I know you're doing the most intense work there, which I will never be able to accomplish in a million years. And, also some great technological magic. The iPhone has revolutionized, the ways, and I'm not just talking about apps. We've probably all got the odd magic app that's quite a fun little gimmicky gizmo to kind of play with, but iPhone magic where you're not even aware that there's an iPhone in play. Some of the technological advances in terms of method are really exciting. And not to say that I don't know if I 100% endorse the use of technology and magic, certainly in mentalism, because sometimes it's almost too easy, and things can very easily go wrong when it's digital and stuff like that. And if it becomes too easy from a methodological method point of view, it can sometimes, I think, inhibit creativity sometimes. But on saying that, I am in awe of some of the stuff that's coming out and thinking, God, it's just endless. I thought this is, like you say, this is quite a niche area. We're talking about magic and it's full of hobbyists and enthusiasts, but yet there seems to be so much new original thought and new method out there. I thought that everything had been done, and no, actually there's more and more stuff being created. And that's so exciting, so exciting. It's such fertile ground still.
His enthusiasm for magic is infectious. He just loves it. The story about going into tannins and being excited by that, the way he's worked magic into his onstage life as Mr. Swallow. I think he said magic is my first love and will always be my love.
Yeah.
It's just so fantastic and so excited to talk about it.
The part about it that still for me is like, holy crap, the man did Houdini's Upside Down 100 times.
Yeah.
Other than Houdini, I don't know that there's someone that has done Houdini's Upside Down 100 times. That's so cool. And when you think about magic in general and the many, many rooms of magic, to quote our friend Eugene Berger, in the House of Magic, there are many rooms. He has been in so many of them, including Houdini's Upside Down, which is incredible to me.
Yeah, particularly when you look at it in terms of the character Mr. Swallow. And I understand that a lot of people don't know Mr. Swallow. There are links in the show notes that will give you a sense of who that character is. But that's a really unlikely thing for Mr. Swallow to do.
Which makes it even, when you hear him talk about it, you just think to yourself, oh, dang it, I wish I could have seen that. But that's my response to almost everybody we get a chance to talk to. I wish I could have seen that. How often have we said, there's a road trip in here? We have got to start doing some of that.
Yes, that's true.
Just loved that interview. Loved him. Loved Ted Lasso.
Anyway, like I said, there are clips of him performing Mr. Swallow. There is a clip of his son and he on a panel show, Mr. Swallow Jr. doing a mentalism trick that is phenomenal, just phenomenal. Anyway, check out all the Mr. Swallow clips and keep an eye out for Nick Mohammed because he is like Roy Kent. He's everywhere.
Yeah,
everywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, love him. Love him.
Yes, and I'm so appreciative of him coming on, and we'd love to have him back. And speaking of love, it's time for the I Love That segment. And, this, Jim, as you know, this particular podcast does not exist in a time or a place.
That's correct.
It is timeless. However, holidays are timeless as well, and we never do any self-promotion, which is, someone once said to me, why don't you have commercials on your podcast? And I said, the whole podcast is a commercial for Eli Marks. Why would you'd be gilding the lily? That's a hat on a hat to have a commercial. But each of us have projects that have a holiday theme to them. And I thought, if you don't mind, we're not usually telling each other what our love that's are. But you do have a holiday movie, and I have some holiday stuff. So this time around, tell me about what you love in a holiday movie.
I will. I see where you're going with this. So I will do that. And you know that this is not something I would do ever.
I know.
And I know it's not something you would do ever, but it's kind of fun given that we both have a holiday connection to talk about this. So I was blessed to be cast in a Hallmark Christmas movie, which premiered on the Hallmark streaming channel in December of 2023 and is now part of just the straight up Hallmark channel they did it in their Christmas in July, and now it's there if you want to see it. And I don't have a large part by any stretch of the imagination, but I had the time of my life.
And what is it called?
It's called Rescuing Christmas, and it's just a little, it has, yes, all the Hallmark
all the Hallmark hallmarks.
All the Hallmark hallmarks. That's exactly right. A girl goes back to her hometown after a terrible breakup and meets a guy, and they don't get along. Then they get married. It has that. That's the sort of romantic through line of most Hallmark movies. But this one also has a lot of comedy in it because she is so disgruntled with life that when the North Pole, who's trying to drum up some Christmas spirit, decides to grant 3 wishes to someone in an effort to drum up this Christmas spirit, they pick this girl who one of her wishes is, I'm just so tired of the whole darn thing. I wish Christmas would just disappear and go away.
don't hate Christmas. I just don't know how much more of it I can take. But I really wish
Christmas would disappear.
Who's Santa?
I did a very silly thing. I made a wish that Christmas would disappear.
And it does. And so in the movie, Rachel Lee Cook, who plays the lead, is the only person with a frame of reference for Christmas. And she now feels bad when she realizes that she's responsible for this. And so she starts to try to bring Christmas back in some way, shape, or form. But when you talk about doing some of the traditional Christmas things to people who have no frame of reference, like, you're going to do what? You're going to bring a tree into my house? For what purpose? Well, we're going to light it. And of course, there's no lights. There's no Christmas ornaments. None of that exists. So nobody has a frame of. So it's clever. It's fun. It's funny. And I play her father and have, 2-3 scenes, but it was just a delight. And for a guy at my advanced age to get a chance to have a trailer on a movie set and have people knock, Mr. Cunningham, dinner is being served if you'd like to come, or I can certainly make a plate and bring it back for you if you'd like. I mean, it was that kind of an experience. Mr. Cunningham? Yes. Can you call me Jim? No, I don't think I can. Would you be available to go to costume for a moment? They'd like to see you. Yes, of course, I'm happy to go. If now's not convenient, no, it's fine. I can go. From Rachel Lee Cook, from the producer, really, who before I even got on set, they had been shooting for about a week. And the producer, Mandy, sent out this email about how grateful she was for the cast and how it was going. And I read this email from this LA producer thinking, what in God's, this is not what I expect at all. So it was just a delight. And I think you'd enjoy it, folks, at your Christmas holiday celebration. Work it into the mix. It's a Wonderful Life, White Christmas, Rescuing Christmas, somewhere in that order. There may be one or two, Home Alone, maybe, and then the Santa Claus, and then Rescuing. I don't know where it will fit in your Christmas holiday movie viewing. It's certainly up the ladder a little bit in our house here. So there's my I love it. I did love it. I love the experience. They treated us all so well, and everybody from Rachel Lee Cook, the producer, the director, right down to the guy who drove the van to take us from base camp to wherever we were shooting that day. Super nice.
All right. If I can find links for it, I'll put those in the show notes. That Rescuing Christmas, probably worth getting the Hallmark Channel just for that this year.
There you go. What is your I love that?
Well, I have you to thank basically for this, because you dragged me into a live production of A Christmas Carol, which we did for 10, 12 years every year.
Yeah.
We did it a lot. From that, I developed a love of A Christmas Carol. And there's a couple things that I've produced since then that definitely connect with A Christmas Carol. There is I don't know if it's really a companion series to Eli Marks, but the Como Lake Players Mystery Series is in the same universe as Eli Marks, and they do have a crossover story where Eli meets Leah Sexton, who runs the Como Lake Players Theater in St. Paul. Eli's in Minneapolis, and there's the short story, The Self-Working Card Trick, on the Eli side, and the short story, An Opening Nightmare, on the Como Lake Players side. It's the same story, just told from their different points of view. Anyway, the third book in the Como Lake series is called Rehearsed to Death. And the theater is doing their production of A Christmas Carol, their annual production of A Christmas Carol, which is always directed by a guy named Harley Vincent. And he also plays Scrooge, and he's done it forever. And it's the only show he does there, and he has his own cast that shows up, and they just sort of take over the theater, only that portion of the year. The story begins when it's discovered that he's been murdered. In fact, the opening line of the book is,
Harley was dead to begin with. There was no doubt about that.
And it goes
very nice.
Yes. And it has lots of Christmas Carol jokes in it and references to productions that we've been involved with. And Leah ends up having to take over to directing the show. And there's a video trailer to the audiobook and the book. Put a link to that in the show notes. The other Christmas Carol related thing that you were a little more deeply involved with, Jim, is A Christmas Carol, which is a rewriting of A Christmas Carol from the point of view of a dog. And that's part of my Greyhound Classic series, where classic books have been rewritten by greyhounds. I didn't ever intend on doing that, but in working on Rehearsed to Death and getting back into A Christmas Carol and making sure that I was using any quotes from it were from the Dickens version and not from, different versions over the years have different lines that have sort of snuck into the vernacular, but they weren't exactly what Dickens wrote. I realized that this would be a perfect story to be told by a dog who is accompanying Scrooge.
This is Carl, and this is Carl's owner, Ebenezer Scrooge. Together, they're about to embark on a holiday journey which will change their lives. It's the classic story you know, told through the eyes of a greyhound. A Christmas Carol. A greyhound ghost story of Christmas. Available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook formats.
You did the audiobook for it. Ebook and the print book have lovely etchings in it from the original classic version, in which we've added a greyhound. Because of you, I love A Christmas Carol, and because of you, I now have a couple Christmas Carol themed books and audiobooks, and I appreciate you narrating the audiobook version because it's the closest we'll get to doing A Christmas Carol together.
Yeah. I just want to say to our listeners, if you're going, well, what's the deal with the greyhound? John and his charming wife rescue greyhounds. So racing greyhounds, after they have completed their racing life and for one reason or another are too old to do that, instead of them, let's just say, going to the farm, if you know what I mean, John and a whole group of people, I'm sure where you live, this is common too. There is these greyhounds that are rescued. And John, how many have you rescued over the years?
I believe we're on number 5 and number 6 right now.
5 and 6.
Any editing that's done on this show is done primarily to get rid of the sound of them whining or singing or occasionally getting up from a precious nap and shaking. They are an addictive breed.
Yes, and so I just want to I wanted to make that clear to the audience that this is coming, as my father, God rest his soul, would say, John comes by this Christmas Carol honestly. He comes by it out of love. It's I think you'd enjoy it, especially if you like dogs. Doesn't have to be greyhounds. I got 3 dogs of my own, and I love A Christmas Carol. So let's get down to business. I think the last time I read chapter 22, so before I launch into chapter 23, just recap 22 for us, would you, sir, Mr. Author?
I will. This is round 3 of the explanation. As I mentioned last time, it takes a long time sometimes to explain a mystery, although this isn't overly long. Eli explains how and why Tracy killed Tyler and why Clifford Thomas was killed because of book title, A Snowball's Chance, how that all happened, and then Tracy's arrested, and that brings us to the end of chapter 22.
Chapter 23. You know what they say, a party is not a party until someone gets read their Miranda rights. This wry observation came from none other than Sherry Lisbon. Even after I laughed, her 2 attorney companions still seemed unsure of the comedic intention of her proclamation. Then Sherry cracked what, for her, passed as a smile, and the 2 women instantly offered up their impressions of what a smiling attorney might look like. This was just one of the many odd conversations which filled the next half hour after Tracy was arrested, and the rest of the attendees filed out of the auditorium, through the lobby, and into the crisp, cold evening. Deirdre stopped long enough to thank me for my help in arranging this. You were correct in your theory, she said. There was a grudging edge to her compliment. I got the broad strokes right, I suppose, I said. Thanks for letting me stage it. Deirdre shrugged. Once you laid out the evidence, homicide was in general agreement. We figured if Tracy was working with an accomplice, she would have copped to it when you confronted her. But it looks like she was working alone. That's the way it looks. Deirdre glanced over at me, the slightest traces of a smile on her face. Anyway, try to stay out of trouble for at least a couple days. I held the door for her, and just as she exited, Chip Kavanaugh came up behind me and gave my back a playful slap. "Thanks for throwing this shindig," he said with a wink. "And I hope I didn't tease you too much with my ad on Glendower's website," he added, winking again. "That was you?" He nodded, not even trying to suppress a smirk. "Why?" Chip shrugged. "Who knows? I clearly have too much time on my hands. And speaking of time," he said, glancing at his watch, "I better get moving. I tell you, this is the best party I've ever been at that involved handcuffs." He stopped and touched his chin thoughtfully. "No, strike that. Second best." No one thought this joke was funnier than Chip, who was still laughing as he made his way out the door. From my vantage point in the lobby, I could see Sherry Lisbon was standing in front of the theater, perhaps waiting for her car to be brought around. Chip scanned the area surreptitiously and then took a position next to her. From where I stood, it didn't appear they were speaking or relating in any fashion. They were just standing, quietly, side by side. They stood there for a moment, and then Chip reached over, slowly, very slowly, and took her hand. She batted it away without turning toward him. He waited several seconds and then made a second attempt. This time, it was accepted, tentatively at first, and then with more enthusiasm. They stood there for several moments holding hands, as if it were a completely alien action for both of them. Then Sherry's ride, provided by her two attorneys, pulled up in front of the theater. Chip and Sherry immediately separated like magnets being pushed apart, she getting in the car quickly while he turned and headed down the sidewalk in search of his own car. I thought of my encounter with Sherry Lisbon in the downtown St. Paul parking ramp, the one connected to Chip Kavanaugh's condo building, and realized the two eccentric millionaires were conducting a courtship of sorts in their own awkward, inimitable fashion. I smiled because the idea struck me as, well, sort of cute. I was interrupted from this reverie by a grunt behind me. I turned to see that Mrs. Tyler James and her friend Gunner were approaching me in an obligatory fashion, like I was the underpopulated reception line at a one-person wedding. The pair stood there staring at me for a long moment, Mrs. James still masticating the life out of her gum. "Thanks for coming by," I said finally. "I didn't think we had a choice," she said in her typical sullen fashion. "That's true. Sometimes when the police are involved in an invitation, the wording can suggest your options are limited." "Whatever," was all she said as the pair slouched out. I shook my head, thinking how proud Oscar Wilde would have been if he had exited an event with the same wit and elan. "It's been quite a week. I'm going to turn in," Harry said as he buttoned up his coat, even though he'd only be outside for 10 seconds on the walk from the theater to our door. "And don't forget your hat," Franny added, tugging a bright red stocking cap over his already disheveled gray hair and pulling it tight around his ears. He readjusted it, and she batted his hands away, putting it back the way she had it originally. He gave me a smile. "Franny knitted me a hat," he said. "I can see that," I said. "I can give Franny a ride home," I offered. Harry shook his head. "That won't be necessary," was all he said. He took her hand, and they headed out the door and turned left. My curiosity got the best of me, so I pushed the lobby door open far enough to poke my head out. The two shuffled as far as the magic shop, and then Harry pulled out his keys, opened the door, and they disappeared inside. I slowly stepped back into the lobby. "Isn't it adorable?" Megan said. She and Quentin had come up behind me while I was spying on my uncle and the woman who was apparently his girlfriend. They're dating? I said, not sure if that was even the right term to use for a couple whose combined age was pushing 150 years. They have been for weeks, Megan said with a laugh. For a magician, you're not very observant. That's why Harry's been so tired, because Franny's been keeping him up late just about every night of the week. Before I could even process this idea, Megan continued. They've been taking line dancing lessons, she continued. Apparently, Harry's quite light on his feet, she added, turning to Quentin. That does not surprise me in the least, Quentin said. And then something across the lobby caught his attention. He raised his hand in a wave. I believe, he said, shouting across the room, that something of an apology on my part is in order. We turned to see Randall Glendower in the midst of wrapping Jinx's cage with an extra blanket. He looked over at us, smiled a crooked, quizzical smile. Apology? He said. Quentin moved toward him, and we followed. Yes, Quentin said. I believe I unjustly maligned you and your monkey. He extended his hand to Randall. No hard feelings, I trust? Randall struggled to his feet, using Quentin's extended hand for support as well as for its intended purpose, as a sign of his apology. Oh, no, man, no problem, Randall said once he was upright. It's not every day you get to be a murder suspect, and your secret weapon is your monkey. In fact, he continued, looking off into space, that would make for a really cool comic book series. Man and monkey. I like that. There was a short, sharp screech from inside the cage. Okay, how about monkey and man? Randall offered. He took the complete lack of response from Jinx as his approval and began to zip up his large furry parka in anticipation of the impending walk to his car. He picked up the cage and gave the lobby one last look. What happens to the theater now they are minus one manager? He asked. I had no idea, so I turned to Megan. What does happen? I repeated, then pivoted back to Randall to explain. Megan is the landlord here. She owns the whole block. Wow, Randall said with genuine enthusiasm. A landowner. Very impressive. Thanks, Megan said. Well, the theater has been leased by an entertainment consortium out of Indianapolis for about the last 10 years, so I figure they'll put out a call for a new manager. Randall's eyes narrowed, and he lowered his voice. When is their lease up? Megan lowered her voice to match his conspiratorial level. 2.5 months. That's a fun fact, Randall said. Very fun. He looked at his watch. Do you have a minute to talk? About leases? Sadly, yes, always, Megan said. He headed over to a corner of the lobby, in part to shield the monkey's cage from the blasts of cold air which pummeled us every time the lobby door opened, and in part to shield the conversation from anyone who might be listening. Not that anyone was. I'm going to go talk to Mr. Glendower about the lease, Megan said. Do you mind giving Quentin a ride back to his hotel? Before I could agree or disagree, she and Randall were already deep in conversation. So, for the second time in the past 10 days, I made the drive from Minneapolis to downtown St. Paul, with Quentin Moon as my passenger. Here's what I don't understand, he said, turning to me, once we were well on our way. One of the homicide detectives, the taller one. Homicide Detective Fred Hutton, I said. That's the one. He said Tracy would be charged in the deaths of Tyler James and Clifford Thomas, but he made no mention of the 2 attempts on your life and the one on Harry. Well, that's because she didn't do them, I said. But Megan told me someone had attempted to run you down with a car. Someone did, but as it turned out, it was just some guy stealing a car which had been left running. He probably didn't even realize he almost hit me. All right, he said, accepting that answer for the moment. But what about the ice on the roof, which was pushed down on you and Harry? I shrugged. The police found no footprints on the roof, and everything was melting that day. We get ice dams on the roof, and a bunch of it picked that moment to fall. Wrong place, wrong time. Quentin nodded slowly as he considered this. So we're all victims of a post hoc fallacy, he said. I hadn't heard that phrase before. Post hoc fallacy. How do you mean? If event B happens after event A, then it must be connected to event A, he said. You tap the box with the magic wand, and then open the box to reveal a rabbit. The audience thinks the wand and the tapping somehow caused the rabbit to appear. They're always looking for causations, proximity, that sort of thing. Ah, well, the desperate human need to connect point A with point B. Where would we magicians be without it? I grunted in agreement, only vaguely understanding what he was talking about. We rode in silence, and then he spoke up again. But what about when Tracy was attacked, he said, when they pushed her off the ladder, and then when she was attacked in the theater? My best guess is both those events were courtesy of the goons she owes money to, I said. Tracy just cleverly incorporated them into the overall murder scenario, which helped to deflect suspicion away from her. Ah, yes. Classic magic misdirection, Quentin said. It's the same reason some of the best magic tricks work. Truth, 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 half-truth, truth. I looked over at him. Quentin, you think about magic way more than I do, I said. Agreed. Some might say I think about magic too much, he replied. It seems to work for you. Another pause in the conversation, and then Quentin turned to me again. Eli, this may be an uncomfortable topic, but I can't help think our relationship has something of a toxic strain to it that, unless addressed, makes its long-term viability doubtful. I processed the sentence as best I could and came back with the one word that expressed the totality of my comprehension. What? I believe our relationship, you and me, our potential friendship, has been poisoned by jealousy, and I so wish that weren't the case. I was surprised at his perception, as I felt I had done a fairly good job of covering up my feelings the last 2 weeks. Poison, I said, is a strong word. I can think of no other word that fits the bill, and I hold myself 100% accountable. I turned to look at him for a moment, but his expression offered no further information. How are you accountable? He laughed. I certainly can't blame you for my all-consuming jealousy, can I? Took a moment for this to sink in. No, I said slowly. I suppose you can't. I decided silence would be the best tool for ferreting out where this was headed, and moments later my patience was rewarded. Oh, I would so much like to have a relationship like the one you've forged with the divine Megan, he said softly. What's stopping you? I asked, then quickly added. I mean, with someone other than Megan. Magic, he finally said, the word coming out like a sigh. Here's what I know to be true. You can't spend 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, throwing playing cards at high speed into watermelons and not expect it to have a detrimental impact on your adult relationships. I suppose so, but look at the result. You're a great, truly great magician. It felt good to say this out loud, and even better, I was surprised to discover, to say it directly to Quentin. As are you, my friend, with, I suspect, far less of the attendant angst and gnashing of teeth. Oh, I wouldn't go that far, I began, but he cut me off. I watched you, performing in that ludicrous rabbit and hat costume. Sorry about that, by the way. I wasn't aware of the client's plan in that regard. It wasn't so bad, I said. It proved to be an ideal icebreaker. You were magnificent, he said, punching the last word for full dramatic effect. I was just doing a little walk-around close-up magic, I said, with a verbal shrug, but again, he cut me off. No, not in the least. You were performing miracles, he said. I watched your audience, and they were swept away in the illusions. You've learned the one trick most magicians never master in a lifetime of performing, and you do it by second nature. What's that? I was bowled over by his flow of compliments and more than willing to take one more. You never attempt to fool your audience, to one-up them, to outsmart them. Your goal is to create and share a true moment of magic and mystery with each and every one of them. It is the rare conjurer who has mastered that skill, my friend. He let this sink in, which was helpful, as I was having trouble processing what he was saying. You're no slouch yourself, I finally said. High praise indeed, he said. I signaled to change lanes, heading toward the 10th Street exit into downtown St. Paul. I recognized the drive was more than half over, and I still had one unanswered question. One thing I would like to know, if you don't mind, I began. He spread his hands open in front of him. I am all attention. Okay, I began, not sure how to navigate the delicate proposition of asking another magician how a trick is accomplished. When you do the miser's dream, ah yes, the miser's dream, he said, a true gem. As Henry Hay so wisely put it, the miser's dream will repay you for everything you as a magician put into it. You've clearly put a lot into it, I said, still trying to navigate how to get to my question while simultaneously navigating the oddball street layout, which is the heart and soul of downtown St. Paul. I could see the St. Paul Hotel in the distance, but the alternating one-way streets and sudden and unannounced direction-changing road construction was impeding my progress. I decided to put the time to good use. At the conclusion of the routine, I said, when you pour all the coins out of the bucket and then pick them up handful after handful and pour them back into the bucket? Yes, he said, a smile in his voice, clearly proud of where this question was headed. And then you turn the bucket over, I continued, remembering the shock and surprise which I and everyone in the audience had felt when the bucket was revealed to be empty. Truly and completely empty, with the exception of one single coin falling out. I smiled at how that moment had thrilled me, and not in a, hey, I'm a magician and he fooled me sort of way. It had truly been, in the finest sense of the word, an illusion, a moment of pure magic. I couldn't help but smile thinking about it. Yes, he said, gesturing for me to continue. You wish to know how that was accomplished? We had pulled into the circular driveway in front of the hotel, and one of the valets or bellmen was racing to the car. Quentin held up a hand without even turning his head, and the young man froze in his tracks. Quentin looked at me to confirm my question. I shook my head. No, on second thought, I'd rather not know how it was done, I said. I'm good.
Nice.
We end that chapter with Eli deciding he doesn't want to know how Quentin did his conclusion of A Miser's Dream, which was based on my seeing Juan Tamariz giving a lecture and realizing I really didn't want to know how he was doing it, and me getting up and leaving, going, I don't want to know how the trick is done. Have you reached that point?
I almost always. I've been there forever. I think, and I don't know who I'm quoting when I say this, but when you learn what the magician does, it's not magic anymore. And I so love when magic is, I've said this 1,000 times on this podcast, when magic is done well, it's almost a religious experience. It can be just take you out of being an adult with problems and put you right back into being a child filled with joy and wonder. And so I seldom want to know how a trick is done if it's done well.
Yeah, well, that's the way that's where Eli is with Quentin at the end of that chapter. That chapter also, I realized in looking at it, it is sort of like the ending of the first version of Murder on the Orient Express movie, in which virtually every character comes over to Lauren Bacall to pay their respects to her, and it becomes basically a curtain call for every one of the characters. And I think I'm emulating that, where I want to just give every one of them a chance to say goodbye before we move on to what will be the final chapter and epilogue, which will be in episode 424. So that's it for 423. Next time, we're going to listen to that final chapter, and we're also going to revisit someone who was one of our first guests, Dick Cavett.
Dick Cavett. Again, the joy I get out of talking to these people who I have idolized my entire life is entirely due to you and your ability to connect with these people. How we get to talk to Dick Cavett is beyond me. I certainly would not have been able to pull this off. So I think you'll enjoy it, folks, as we revisit a little chat with a guy who chatted with a lot of wonderful, famous people.
Yeah, that's next time on the last episode of this season. So strap in. We'll see you guys then.
Happy, yeah.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at EliMarksMysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.